Good afternoon, everyone. This is Cindy Rogers from the Children's Safety Network at Education Development Center. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Preventing E-Cigarette Poisonings Among Children and Youth, Policy and Practice. Before we get started, my colleague Rebecca Wilmer will provide a few technical announcements for today's webinar. Rebecca?
All right, thanks, Cindy. So audio is currently being broadcast through your computer speakers. The quality of the audio is going to depend on the speed of your internet connection. So if the audio is choppy, please try to find either a more stable internet connection, or you can listen over the phone by dialing 866-835-7973. If you're listening through the phone, please mute your computer speakers to eliminate any echoes. Phone lines will be muted during the presentation to eliminate background noise. Answers to frequently asked questions are in the webinar instructions pod that's in the upper left-hand corner. And if you have questions or technical issues, you can type them into that Q&A box that's on the bottom left at any time. After the presentation, we will pause for the presenters to answer your questions. A PDF of the slides is available to download in the file share pod above the slide deck. So if you want to download that resource, you can click on its name and then select the Download Files button to save the document to your computer. We also have several links today in the web links pod above the slides. So if you want to visit a web page, you can click on its name and then select the Browse To button. The webinar will be recorded and the archive will be sent out to all registrants within 2 weeks. Back to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. So today we have two presenters with tremendous experience in this topic, and I greatly appreciate their accepting the challenge of sharing their expertise with us in such a limited time frame. Again, following both presentations, we will take time for your questions. So our first speaker is Dr. Jonathan Klein. Dr. Klein is Senior Vice President for Global Health, Research, and Policy at the American Academy of Pediatrics and is founding director of the Academy's Julius B. Richmond Center, a national center of excellence dedicated to eliminating children's exposure to tobacco and secondhand smoke. Dr. Klein is an expert in adolescent medicine and child and adolescent health services research. He joined the Academy as a full-time staff member in 2009. Mike Freiberg is Senior Staff Attorney with the Public Health Law Center. At the center, he provides technical assistance to jurisdictions around the country working on various tobacco control policies. Previously, he worked on research projects related to menthol in tobacco products, cigarette butt litter, and non-cigarette tobacco products. Mike has worked as an adjunct law professor at the Mitchell Hamline School of Law, where he taught classes in legislation and public health law. He also serves as a Minnesota State Representative and spent 9 years on the Golden Valley City Council, helping to craft that city's strong secondhand smoke ordinance that was adopted in 2004. From 1999 to 2001, Mike worked for a member of Congress as a legislative assistant specializing in health care. And now I'd like to turn the platform over to Dr. Klein. Jonathan?
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, Rebecca, and welcome, everybody. I'm going to very quickly review some of the facts around electronic cigarettes and electronic nicotine delivery systems. I don't have any conflicts and don't intend to discuss unapproved products deliberately. So I want to talk a little bit about what are e-cigarettes and vaping devices, who's using them, and then focus a bit on the public and individual health concerns in terms of their safety, poisoning risk, glamorization, renormalization of smoking, nicotine addiction for young people, whether there's evidence for cessation, and what the evidence is for the harm of secondhand e-cigarette vapor exposure. And that little image in the top is the Surgeon General's report on e-cigarettes in youth and young adults, which just came out last Thursday. So why should we care about these? All of these products, including all of the things in the crayon box there on the right, are actually electronic cigarette products. They are designed and do look cool, and they are likely to appeal to adolescents and young adults. They come in flavors that are designed to appeal to youth as well. You can see there in this picture, they're red hot flavors, mocha flavor, green apple flavor, and we know that flavorings have a big impact on young people's willingness to experiment and become addicted. Vape was the word of the year from the Oxford English Dictionary in 2014, reflecting the increasing prevalence of its use in a variety of places. And the terminology is really changing. Many young people do not relate to these as electronic cigarettes. They may be e-cigars, they may be e-hookahs or hookah sticks, or vape pens, or mechanical tanks, or other forms of alternative nicotine delivery systems. And there are even non-nicotine delivery systems that resemble these devices as well. This is an issue when it comes to surveillance, because if we don't know what to call them or what teens are calling them, it's hard to know who's actually using them. All of these devices have three basic parts. There is a sensor that detects when a user is taking a puff or a drag, which signals to a processor that switches on a heater, which causes heating and atomization of the liquid that is carrying the flavors and nicotine and other substances. And then there's a rechargeable or a one-use battery as well to provide that charge for the devices. They come in all sorts of different ways of relating. There's one that fits on your iPhone, another one that matches this young woman's nails. And they're sold everywhere. They're sold in vape shops, but they're also in convenience stores, gas stations, mall kiosks, grocery stores, and sold over the internet as well. The trends in use among adults are concerning for a couple of reasons. This is the proportion who report ever having tried an electronic cigarette and currently using an electronic cigarette. And it's broken down into those who are current smokers, those who are recent former smokers who have smoked cigarettes within a year, those who are long-term former smokers or who actually stopped using cigarettes a year or more ago and who we believe are becoming re-addicted through these products. And perhaps the most concerning, although the smallest fraction, is the percent of users who are never cigarette smokers. And you'll see that many of this is among young people, actually. Again, one of the issues in who becomes addicted and how and why. So you look at the trends in adult e-cigarette use, and over the last several years, you can see that the majority of users are actually in the younger age group, in this 18 to 24-year-old age group, in terms of who's becoming addicted. A few more in that next age bracket, but it's not the old chronic smokers who are choosing to or becoming addicted or users of e-cigarette products. This looks at the youth risk reporting from the National Youth Tobacco Survey that CDC does among high school students, and it tracks this huge rise in the e-cigarette use among high school students from 2011 up through 2015, where you can see that e-cigarettes have become the leading tobacco product used by teens, surpassing traditional combustible cigarettes. And you can say, well, isn't that better because we have a decrease in the combustible use? But actually, if you see in 2015 here, this was the first year in 2 decades that the rate of combustible traditional cigarette use did not go down. And so this issue of dual use leading to the overall prevalence of smoking is of grave concern when it comes to young people and nicotine addiction. And you can see those brackets make that point too in terms of the tripling of the use and the lack of a decline in youth smoking rates. And this shows the percent of high school students from the YRBS who currently use electronic vapor products. And you can see in the dark purple, that's more than 25% of high school students reporting use in the last 30 days. And the lighter purple color is still more than 20% in all of those states of high school students in school reporting past 30-day use. So what's in this product and why should we worry? Well, there are 3 basic products in electronic cigarette liquid: the humectant or moisturizing agent, the flavoring, and then most of them have nicotine in them. The humectants are generally regarded as safe, or GRAS as it's classified by the Food and Drug Administration, but these are recognized as safe in food use, and it's generally based on scientific evidence from before 1958 or common usage. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have been tested or demonstrated to be safe as inhalants. And in fact, the 2 primary humectants, propylene glycol and glycerin, have actually either not been completely studied or have warnings associated with them for inhalation use. So, for example, propylene glycol, the chemical manufacturer, states that inhalation exposure should be avoided. And for glycerin, when heated and vaporized, it forms acrolein, which actually causes upper respiratory irritation. So these are not necessarily benign products when heated. And in fact, when these products are heated at the temperatures used in electronic cigarette products, they also form formaldehyde and acetaldehyde and acetone and other chemicals that are proven human carcinogens. So the user is exposed to levels of carcinogenic substances from their use at lower levels than found in combustible cigarettes, but still at appreciable levels compared to no exposure. The flavorings contain a bunch of different things, and actually many of the product flavors contain menthol in concentrations that are similar to those in menthol cigarettes, and about 40% of the flavored non-menthol products actually also have menthol in them. The various chemicals that make up menthol flavorings are irritant and are toxic, and many of them are carcinogenic when heated. So again, the components of electronic cigarette juice are not necessarily benign, and there's nicotine in the products as well. And nicotine has complex pharmacodynamics. It's a stimulant at low doses, a depressant at high doses. It reaches the brain very quickly. It stimulates memory and alertness. People feel a sense of well-being. It decreases appetite and can relieve depression. It also increases heart rate and blood pressure, some of the mechanisms that it contributes to cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. And nicotine overdose leads to a variety of physical symptoms, including seizures and headaches and tremors and other issues, and has led to several deaths, both by suicide and also from accidental ingestion. The lethal dose in humans is estimated at around 0.8 milligrams per kilo, although there are reports of survival at higher doses, and the recent literature suggests the actual lethal dose is more in the 6.5 to 13 milligrams per kilo. But that's the equivalent to 2.5 teaspoons of the way that e-cigarette liquid is sold for a medium-sized adult. So a single teaspoon of any one of these liquids is considered to be a likely toxic dose for your average 3-year-old that might come across this flavored liquid and ingest it accidentally in the home setting. And you can see the rate of calls to poison control for e-cigarette related issues is beginning to reach, and I'm sure will soon cross, the combustible cigarette call rate, which, as some of you know, is always a highly popular ingestion when it comes to children on playgrounds and beaches. So the Child Nicotine Poisoning Prevention Act was passed in 2015, and Mike's going to talk about that in more detail, so I'm going to leave that to him, other than to note that this was an extremely narrowly focused bill because FDA did not yet deem authority over these products, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission was explicitly prohibited from regulating anything having to do with tobacco, nicotine, or tobacco products. So compared to the smoked tobacco, the health harms of electronic cigarettes are less harmful. There's no tar. The levels of nicotine can be manipulated and controlled. But compared to tobacco is not really the answer. The real question is, how does this compare to breathing air? And compared to either no tobacco exposure or medicinal quality nicotine replacement, there are significant concerns for lung function from the aldehydes, from the heating of these products. And there are a lot of issues around quality control and safety. Non- and former smokers become addicted. It may maintain combusted tobacco use as opposed to help you eliminate it, and they're mostly unregulated. So let's go into that a little bit more, because the adolescent and young adult brain actually is uniquely susceptible to nicotine addiction. Adolescent brains develop nicotine receptors much more quickly than adult or childhood brains do. And studies have shown pretty conclusively that nicotine exposure during the adolescent period has long-standing and permanent effects on the way that the cells and the receptors are organized, which has an influence on behavior. The secondhand vapor is not just water vapor. It emits nicotine, plus it emits fine particles of similar size to that of traditional cigarettes. And the plume that you see of the vapor is not actually the particulate plume. You can see that the the actual particulates and their distribution in the air actually mimics the exposure you get from a conventional cigarette. And again, you get toxins, but in slightly lower levels than conventional cigarettes. Surfaces are contaminated by these. They combine with other substances. They result in the same kind of off-gassing with ozone and nitrous oxide and with the production of tobacco-specific nitrosamines that are directly carcinogenic. Again, lower levels, but still present. There is animal model data that suggests that there is not a benign effect when it comes to growing lungs as well. So in a mouse model, Sharon McGrath-Morrow at Hopkins has shown that with a 10-minute twice-a-day exposure to secondhand electronic cigarette vapor, that alveolar growth, the lung sac growth, lung function, both immune function and exchange function, and overall linear growth in the animals is affected in newborn mice who are exposed for just 2 weeks for 10 minutes twice a day to e-cigarette secondhand smoke emissions. And these mice also, as adults, exhibit the mouse analog of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder from that exposure as well at higher rates than mice that are not exposed. It's also concerning because this renormalizes the image of smoking in places where smoking is not allowed, and we've seen advertising for electronic cigarettes on television and in other settings for the first time having video ads for a smoking product since the 1970s. And again, many of them are indistinguishable from combustible cigarettes in the way that they appear and in people's use of them. Now, far be it for the companies to actually use images of sex or attractiveness or other things to try to sell these products. And the images and the themes of sale are very similar to the same things that were used for years to sell traditional cigarettes. There are some issues with the safety of batteries. If you've been on an airplane, you know that electronic cigarette batteries can't be checked in baggage. And there have been a couple of cases of fairly severe burns when vape pen or e-cigarette batteries have exploded on or near users. There's also an issue that these can be used to vaporize marijuana-related products. And increasingly, the dual-use issues for marijuana and electronic cigarette products are of concern in states. What's in the containers is really indistinguishable when it comes to whether it's a nicotine or a marijuana-containing compound. So is there any evidence that these help people quit? Well, it's really quite limited. Most of the evidence suggests people cut down. They do not stop completely. In a meta-analysis that Stan Glantz and his colleagues at UCSF have done, the overall chance of quitting if you use e-cigarettes is about 30% less likely than if you use other means to try to quit smoking. So in fact, it's not that they make you more likely to quit, they make you less likely to quit. And they've continued to add to this data. There's some suggestion in some of the most motivated smokers who can't quit with other means that there may be some harm reduction, but in terms of the overall impact, that's not the case. There's also concern that among non-smoking youth, those that use e-cigarettes have a stronger intention to smoke regular cigarettes, and that, I think I missed one. All right, I don't have one there. But anyway, and the longitudinal data that's now emerging from some of these studies suggests that adolescents who do experiment with e-cigarettes are more likely to actually become addicted to combustible cigarettes. So what will happen with this? Now, the expectation is that the market will continue to explode. The FDA deeming rule, which was finally issued in May 2016, 4 years after FDA had the authority to do so, addresses quality control and production standards, restricts sale to under 18, requires warning labels, prevents vending machine sales, does not allow marketing implying that they're healthy or safe, and won't go into effect for 2 years after the rule is finalized. And it misses several important tobacco control aspects in terms of restricting flavorings, requiring child-proof packaging, and limiting marketing and online sales to young people. There are a variety of legal challenges pending, and in fact, there are jurisdictions that have done things to regulate flavors and other means of sale or locations of sale which are within local authorities' rights or state authorities' rights, The fact that the industry is vigorously challenging all of those additional regulations suggests that they are potentially effective and worth looking into. The same is the case for changing tobacco products to an age 21 frame rather than an age 18 frame. So the Academy of Pediatrics' position on e-cigarettes is that sales to youth should be prohibited, that flavors should be banned, that all smoke-free environments should include electronic cigarettes and their vapor in all workplace and all indoor and outdoor clean air rules, just as they do for traditional combustible tobacco and secondhand smoke, and the child-proof packaging should be required for all e-liquids. And within the clinical setting, that parent and child and adolescent prevention, screening, and counseling have to ask the right questions, not just about traditional cigarettes, but also about electronic cigarettes and secondhand vapor exposure. And finally, the Surgeon General's report last week found a couple of things and recommends several actions to protect youth and young adults. The Surgeon General notes that this is a public health concern, that use of these products containing nicotine creates a danger to youth, to pregnant women, and to developing fetuses, and that nicotine in any form among youth is not safe, that e-cigarette aerosol, or as we call it, secondhand vapor, is not harmless, contains harmful constituents, including nicotine, which harms developing brains, that they're marketed by promoting flavors and using media channels and approaches that are used to market conventional tobacco products to youth, and that actions could and should include incorporating e-cigarettes in smoke-free policies, preventing access to e-cigarettes by youth, price and tax policies, retail licensure, regulation of the market where it's likely to attract youth, and educational initiatives targeting youth and young adults. So what should we do? Basically, until we know more about anything and cessation, until we have actual evidence rather than conjecture, we should be recommending medicinal nicotine replacement, use of quit lines, and cessation support in communities to tobacco users and people addicted to nicotine. And probably more importantly, until there is actual effective regulation of marketing, flavoring, and promotion, any continued debate over the possible harm reduction benefits is actually supporting the industry's efforts to delay effective regulation and to create a new generation of young people addicted to nicotine. So I will stop there. Thank you. Look forward to the questions when we get to them, and looking forward to hearing what's happening for you all out in the communities.
Thank you, Jonathan. This is Mike Freiberg speaking now. Let me, whoops, somebody else is controlling this here. I'll let you get it recentered while I start talking. So I'm going to talk about e-cigarette regulations generally, as well as regulations that are specific to the issue of nicotine poisonings. So here's what I'll talk about in this presentation. First, I'll give you a little bit of information about my organizations, both the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium and the Public Health Law Center. Dr. Klein has already provided plenty of background on e-cigarettes, so I want to let you know how they're regulated. And I'll start by talking about some of the general e-cigarette regulations that are out there at the federal level. I'll then talk about state-level regulations specifically dealing with nicotine poisoning. Then I'll talk about the new federal law, the Child Nicotine Poisoning Prevention Act, or the CNPPA. And finally, I'll point you to some resources that we have available. So first, I want to tell you about my organization. The Tobacco Control Legal Consortium is a network of lawyers with the mission of supporting tobacco control policy. Our parent organization is the Public Health Law Center. The Public Health Law Center is a nationally recognized nonprofit of lawyers and policy experts that helps public health professionals, officials, and advocates use the power of law to advance public health. Our organization is a respected authority in U.S. public health policy and a go-to legal resource for dozens of local, state, and national public health organizations. The Public Health Law Center's areas of public health expertise include tobacco control, healthy eating, active living, worker wellness, and public health and human rights. We're based out of the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the main thing we do is provide legal technical assistance. But what is legal technical assistance? There are 4 kinds of services that we provide. First, we can interpret tobacco control policies if questions arise over their implementation and enforcement. We can conduct legal research if you want to know how particular legal issues have been addressed by courts in other jurisdictions. Second, we help public health professionals, advocates, and government attorneys develop effective tobacco control policies. We provide drafting assistance with ordinances, rules, regulations, and legislation. Most of the time, we work with advocates, and we don't generally work directly with elected officials, such as a member of the city council, because we have a policy of not lobbying. And finally, we educate and train people. We do that by speaking in presentations like this and by writing publications that can be found on our website, www.publichealthlawcenter.org. There are 2 main things that we don't do. First, we don't serve as your attorney. The technical assistance that we provide is of a general nature and can tell you how similar issues have been handled in other jurisdictions, but that's not the same thing as dealing with the specific facts of a legal case. If you have a specific legal case, we recommend that you consult with an attorney who's licensed in your jurisdiction to help adjudicate your claim. If it's related to a big tobacco control question, we can help the local attorney as part of our litigation support TA, but we don't represent clients. As part of our litigation support services, we help government attorneys defend tobacco control laws by providing legal research and analysis, helping craft responsive arguments to complaints and motions, and providing consultation about litigation strategy. We also prepare amicus or friend of the court briefs in cases of national importance or involving issues of particular significance, but none of these are the same as direct representation. And the second thing we don't do is lobby elected officials. 2 things worth mentioning are, first, our services are free for public health advocates. We are funded to help ensure that tobacco control policies are as effective as possible around the country. And second, it helps to call us early so that we can spot issues early on. So with that out of the way, let's talk about e-cigarettes, and I'll start by how they are regulated. Now, e-cigarettes have been sold in the U.S. for nearly 10 years, and the initial federal response was for the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, to declare them to be drug delivery devices. Now, products like Nicorette and other smoking cessation products had to go through a lengthy process to get approved as smoking cessation devices, and some e-cigarette companies were making unsubstantiated claims that their products would help people quit smoking without going through that process. So the FDA said these are really drug delivery devices and they should be pulled from the market until they've gone through this process. But a federal court disagreed with that interpretation. It found that the products contain nicotine that was presumably derived from tobacco, and as such, they should be regulated as tobacco products. Congress had just given the FDA authority to regulate tobacco products, and the court felt that that was the more appropriate mode of regulation. So that brings me to the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009, or just the Tobacco Control Act, which gave the FDA authority over tobacco products. By its terms, the law applied only to 4 categories of products: cigarettes, cigarette tobacco, roll-your-own tobacco, and smokeless tobacco. So electronic cigarettes are not on that list. So the FDA did not immediately have authority to regulate e-cigarettes. But the law gave the FDA authority to deem any other tobacco product to be subject to the Act. You may have heard the phrase deeming regulation. That comes from that word in the Tobacco Control Act, and Dr. Klein mentioned it as well in his presentation. So for the FDA to regulate e-cigarettes as tobacco products, it had to first issue a deeming regulation, and it finally did that this year. I'll give you a quick summary of what's in there as it relates to e-cigarettes. So Jonathan talked about this a bit, but I'll go into a bit more detail. So this chart shows how the deeming regulation applies to different categories of non-cigarette tobacco products. The far right column shows you how e-cigarettes are regulated. Under the deeming regulation, e-cigarettes can't be sold to minors, they can't be given away as free samples, they can't be sold from a vending machine except in certain adult-only stores, and they have to have a health warning. Now these are all good policies to address the increasing youth use of e-cigarettes shown in Dr. Klein's slides. But there are some gaps in this. There's no limitation on self-service displays for e-cigarettes. There's no minimum pack size requirements. There's no limitation on retailers opening package. There's no limit on characterizing flavors. And as Jonathan mentioned, there's no limit on advertising of e-cigarettes. And for our purposes on this webinar, the regulation does not address the issue of the packaging of e-liquid containers to reduce the risk of poisoning. So because of that, several states have stepped into the void. Now, several states have passed laws, have put laws in place that require liquid nicotine used in e-cigarettes to be sold in child-resistant packaging. These include at least the states of Arkansas, California, Illinois, Indiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, and Wyoming. It's possible that I missed a state or two there. It's very hard to do a comprehensive search of all of these laws, but at least those states have laws in place. And states did this to address the poisoning risk of the liquid nicotine used in e-cigarettes that was described by Dr. Klein in his portion of the webinar. Now, Minnesota's law is pretty typical of what you would find in one of these state laws. And I should make a personal disclaimer here. In addition to working as a senior staff attorney for the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, I also serve in the Minnesota legislature. Now, I was the legislative author of this law, but I am presenting in my capacity as a senior staff attorney. I feel like I should at least let you know of my other position, though, so you can judge for yourself whether or not I'm being dispassionate here. Now, most states don't regularly deal with packaging requirements for consumer products. That's usually a federal issue. So the Minnesota law here just references the federal regulations, which I will talk about in a minute. It says that any liquid intended for use in an electronic delivery device, and that's the term used in Minnesota statutes to mean e-cigarettes, has to be sold in packaging that meets those federal requirements. Many states do have an exemption for liquid nicotine sold in pre-filled containers, or containers that are not intended to be opened. And the federal liquid nicotine packaging law has something similar, and I'll get to that momentarily. But as I mentioned, the Minnesota law here cites to some federal standards for child-resistant packaging, and so that's a good time to talk about the federal law and how that works. Now, Congress passed the CNPPA this year, and it says that any nicotine sold in a liquid nicotine container has to meet federal packaging standards that are laid out here, and these are the same federal packaging standards mentioned in the Minnesota law that was on the previous slide. So what are these standards? What do they require? Well, they're pretty long, especially the testing procedures. Essentially, though, these regulations define child-resistant packaging as packaging that is difficult for children under the age of 5 to open. So the testing process is kind of elaborate, but it involves giving children between the ages of 42 and 51 months 5 minutes to attempt to open an empty package. If they're not successful, they are given an additional 5 minutes after being shown how to open it. And if they're successful at either point, the test is considered a failure, somewhat ironically. At least 85% of the children must be unable to open it for the package to pass the test. And adults are also tested to make sure that they can open it. If the package is impossible for adults to open, it wouldn't serve much use for anybody. Packaging companies are familiar with these procedures since they're used across the country, and they do manufacture containers that are marketed as specifically meeting these requirements. Now, it's important to mention that the standard for packaging in this law is child-resistant, which the federal regulations call special packaging, and that's not the same thing as child-proof. Now, child-resistant packaging may be able to be opened at sometimes by children. It just means that it's difficult for a child under the age of 5 to open. It also means that most able-bodied adults should be able to open the package. Now, these packaging standards are enforced by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is an agency that not many tobacco control advocates such as me have a lot of experience with. I mentioned most tobacco control regulations are now in the authority of the Food and Drug Administration and not the CPSC. So that's related to another provision now in the CNPPA. So that first is there is a savings clause, and the savings clause affirms that the FDA retains the authority to adopt regulations related to child-resistant packaging or other manufacturing or sales regulations when it comes to liquid nicotine, e-cigarettes, and any other tobacco product. It does require the FDA to consult with the Consumer Product Safety Commission, though, if it does this. I mentioned that many states already have adopted child-resistant packaging requirements. Sometimes you'll hear about federal laws preempting state laws on certain topics. Now, the CNPPA doesn't say anything about whether or not existing state laws related to child-resistant packaging will remain in effect, So that might be a question a court would have to resolve. Now, some of the state laws are stronger than the federal law out there. The second provision I wanted to mention in the CNPPA is an exclusion for sealed, pre-filled, and disposable containers of liquid nicotine that are generally inaccessible to the public. Now, generally speaking, these are disposable e-cigarettes. The child-resistant packaging requirement does not apply to these products. As I mentioned, many of the state laws have similar exemptions. The CPSC has also said that the law does not apply to liquid that is just used as the base for dilution or extract, to empty packages, or to products that are not intended to be sold as is, meaning they're meant to be used by another manufacturer or by a repackager. Now, just to show you an example, and there were some good ones in Jonathan's slides, the e-cigarettes on the left are disposable ones, and the nicotine within them is not intended to be accessed by consumers through ordinary use. So the child-resistant packaging requirement in the CNPPA would not apply to those products. The picture on the right is of an e-liquid tank that would be filled by e-liquid that has to be sold in child-resistant packaging under the federal law. We have a fair amount of resources on our website, www.publichealthlawcenter.org, related to e-cigarettes and packaging, and I just wanted to make you aware of these. So this is the e-cigarette portion of our website. There's some background information on e-cigarettes in the body, but on the right you can see related topics and different publications on e-cigarettes. The top publication is our 50-state survey of laws dealing with e-cigarettes. This is a screen grab from that survey. We have an interactive map on our website there, but also it's in a text format if that's easier for you. You can find out what the e-cigarette laws in your state are using this resource. And we have publications specific to the topic of liquid nicotine packaging. The document on the left describes Minnesota's law in more detail, and the one on the right is a general fact sheet on this topic. You can contact us at any time. This is the main switchboard for us, as well as our website, our general email address, Twitter handle, Facebook, all of the standard resources. You can get in touch with us that way. You can also find my direct contact information on our website. And that is what I have prepared to talk about, so I will hand it back to Cindy and Rebecca.
Great. Thank you both, John and Mike, for those fabulous presentations. That was a lot of information. And let me remind everyone that this webinar is recorded, and you will receive the recording in a couple of weeks. There's also a PDF of the slides in the file share pod at the top of the screen. So now we have plenty of time for questions and answers from our experts today. And I would remind you to go ahead and type in your questions in the Q&A box as you see to the left bottom of the screen, and we will get to those. So let me start with a question for you, John. Could you talk a little more about how young children are getting exposed to electronic cigarettes, and what are they actually accessing when they are poisoned?
So young children are exposed to electronic cigarettes from the secondhand vapor of users exposing them in their environment. So we know that the nicotine and other products are absorbed from both the air and the surfaces in children's environments. And the recommendation would be, as for combustible cigarettes, that the product shouldn't be used in any environment in which children are going to spend time or in any setting in which there's shared air. This has some implications for the new rules for multi-unit housing, for example, which have not yet included electronic cigarettes in their recommendations around tobacco products. The other way that children are exposed is in the refillable and reusable devices where people are buying electronic cigarette liquid and refilling their devices from a supply of liquid. And so whether it's the liquid that's actually in the device or whether it's the liquid in the container that's being used to store the refill, there's the potential for ingestion and eating or drinking the products in that way.
And related to that, could you talk about exposure of the liquid on skin?
There is definitely absorption through the skin. It's not as efficient as the aerosol or the ingestion, but there clearly is absorption of the nicotine through skin contact. And in fact, that's been true for all forms of nicotine, going back to the well-documented green tobacco sickness among children in families with adults who are working in tobacco fields and coming in direct contact with the plants as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And while we're on that subject, could you just talk a little bit about resources that the American Academy of Pediatrics or others have that are available for, say, child care workers, people in local health departments, people at emergency room call centers? We've got a number of folks who are looking for some resources. Could you point us to those and tell us a little bit about those, please?
Sure. On the web link side, I think you've listed some of our resources, but the www.aap.org/Richmond Center is our tobacco control center within the Academy, and there are extensive resources there. Those are primarily organized for professionals, but they include some consumer side resources as well. And the Richmond Center site has both state-by-state policy breakdown and also has an extensive series of PowerPoint presentations that are available for download and for people to use for professional and paraprofessional education. We also have healthychildren.org and healthychildren.org in Espanol, which are designed for consumer information about child and adolescent health issues. And both those sites have both some enduring materials designed for parents and children and young people around the health issues around tobacco and electronic cigarettes. And Healthy Children also keeps up to date with sort of new emerging research so that new content is posted there as it's available. We have a Center for Health in Head Start that will also have a Head Start-focused tobacco control piece, but that is not posted yet, which is why we didn't send you the web link. But it will come up on the Healthy Children site with a pointer to it when that's posted as well.
Great, thank you. And Mike, a question for you. One of our participants asked if you would please clarify, is the Consumer Product Safety Commission regulating the packaging, or is it the FDA? And is the packaging rule now in effect?
Thank you for the question. At this point, only the Consumer Product Safety Commission is regulating the packaging. The FDA has the authority to do it, but it hasn't exercised that authority yet. About 2 years ago, the FDA issued what's called an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, saying it might do that at some point and just asking for comments. But it didn't end up, when it passed the deeming regulation, the FDA did not include any provision relating to packaging. As I mentioned, the Child Nicotine Poisoning and Prevention Act did have a savings clause that that made it clear in federal law that the FDA still has the authority to regulate the packaging through whatever means it does. It does say, though, if the FDA does regulate packaging, it has to consult with the Consumer Product Safety Commission in the best way to do that. The second part of the question was whether it's effective or not. The answer is yes. The law was dated January 28th. And the effective date says it becomes effective 180 days after that, so that would be sometime around July, I think, is when it became effective.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see. So I'm not sure which of you or if both of you want to take this question, but one of our participants states, a recent report shows e-cigarette use among teens has not increased as thought, and I'm not sure what report she's referring to, but she asks if you can discuss this.
Sure, I think I could take that. The CDC data showed that there was still an increase going on. I think you're probably referring to the Monitoring the Future drug abuse data out of the University of Michigan, which looks at a variety of substances in 12th, 10th, and 8th grades. That study, I haven't seen the primary data, but I did see the press reports as well, showed that there was a slight decline in vaping rates. But I don't know how that question is being asked and whether they have captured the products that young people are using that are actually electronic nicotine delivery devices but not referred to by the youth as e-cigarettes. And in fact, their investigators note in their release that whether this is a peak or a pause in the rise really can't be determined until subsequent years of their study. So I think whether the right number for high school seniors is 16% or 15% or 13% doesn't really answer what's really happening with this as an entry to nicotine addiction.
Thank you. Again, and Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, that was pretty good.
Okay, great. I'll throw this next question out, and maybe both of you want to try to answer this as well. The question is, it was mentioned that the FDA has not done anything about regulating flavoring. So the question is, what regulations would they or could they put into place regarding flavorings?
I can, this is Mike, I could probably start with that if you want.
Sure, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it's a little more specific than that. So I think what we said was the FDA hasn't restricted at all characterizing flavors in e-cigarettes. The FDA has passed a flavor restriction for conventional combustible cigarettes. So those cigarettes can no longer be sold in flavors like cherry, chocolate, alcohol flavor, candy flavor under federal law. There is an exemption in that restriction for menthol, so and for just tobacco flavors. So menthol conventional cigarettes can still be sold. There is no comparable restriction on flavors being located in non-cigarette tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, at the federal level. There are, however, a few sales restrictions at the local level related to non-cigarette tobacco products. So both New York City and Providence, Rhode Island have passed regulations in place. Now, since we're talking about e-cigarettes specifically, though, even within that, there's some variation. So New York City's restriction on the sale of flavored tobacco products does not cover e-cigarettes, but Providence does. So, even though there's no federal restriction on flavoring for e-cigarettes at this point, it is something that can be done as a sales restriction at the state or local level. But, again, there's various questions about it, whether it applies to e-cigarettes, whether it covers menthol, would be probably the biggest ones.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Another question from one of our participants. She's asking, has any research been done on the potential harmful effects from crushing up opioids, marijuana, and other drugs into the e-liquids?
The e-liquids that contain THC and other marijuana derivatives are readily available. And in particular in states with legal or medical marijuana, they are a form that's readily available. And any of the refillable devices can be used to vaporize those products as well. There is some emerging evidence that use of marijuana products and nicotine products together have a much more severe and and dangerous impact on brain development than either one alone. And I think that's quite concerning when it comes to the availability of the products and whether they are in fact contributing to mutual risks when it comes to adolescent and young adult brain maturation and development.
Great. Thank you, John, for that. Let's see. Another question asks if there have been any credible studies completed yet on third-hand vapor.
So, the whole
Can
concept.
you explain that?
The whole concept of third-hand smoke would be the toxins that are left on surfaces and that that reemerge into the environment from flat surfaces and draperies and other things in rooms where people have smoked in the past. And there's no question that some of the toxins from both traditional and e-cigarette vapor form more toxic compounds over time with exposure to other chemicals that are present in the environment. So there is some clear evidence that third-hand electronic vapor does create toxins on surfaces and is absorbable from surfaces. Again, third-hand vapor or third-hand smoke is really a component of second-hand smoke, but some people like to point out that it really helps provide the evidence that if you're using tobacco products in a room where people are going to be exposed later, that doesn't create a safe environment because of the re-emergence of toxins into the air that non-smokers would breathe in that room if you smoked in it or vaped in it when they weren't there.
Great. Thank you, John.
And someone asked about whether the non-nicotine vapor has the same effects. The animal studies suggest that it has some of the same effects on lung growth and air exchange, not quite the same effect on some of the suppression of the immune function. So that the nicotine itself has a toxic effect, but the vaporization of the humectant agents, the propylene glycol or glycerin, also cause harm to the tissue.
Okay. Thank you, John. Mike, I think this may be a question that you might address. The question is, how likely is it that regulators will restrict television advertising, billboards, sponsoring youth events, etc., just like cigarette regulations?
I guess I'd say it's unclear. A lot of the limitations, for example, on television advertising for conventional cigarettes were initially created through some of the settlements that arose out of the tobacco litigation in the late 90s. So since that was, since those were settlements, the conventional cigarette manufacturers agreed not to do that. And so if it were to happen, it is possible. It's possible that something could happen in the e-cigarette context too. At the federal level, the Federal Trade Commission, for example, has authority to regulate deceptive trade practices. But the U.S. Supreme Court has afforded some First Amendment protection to commercial speech. So any regulation would have to be drawn pretty tightly with strong emphasis on science to withstand a court challenge, because there almost certainly would be one to something like that. So it's not impossible, but it would have to be pretty carefully drafted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. John, a question for you. You said that you expected that the market will continue to explode. Can you give us some ideas why you're thinking things are going in that direction?
Well, I think even if deeming does begin to create limits, the rules are not going to be in place for almost another 2 full years, and whether they're implemented before or during the legal challenges, I would defer to Mike and to others. I think that if we continue to have fairly unregulated marketing to young people over that time period, we're going to see continued increase in prevalence and increase in rates of addiction. So I wish I were more optimistic. I think that the other factor we're going to be seeing there is the rules that we've gotten from the FDA are sort of the best we could do in a relatively favorable environment for regulation to protect the public health. And while I hope that the new administration will be equally committed to protecting the children and their health, there may be a reluctance to be as aggressive with regulatory action.
Great. Thank you. So here's a question. I don't know which of you would, or both of you might want to take this. The question is, what, if any, conversations are occurring on policy and practice surrounding the explosions with the electronic cigarettes?
I'm not aware of any, other than the airline rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the FDA at this point hasn't done that, but they do have the authority to regulate in that area too, just manufacturing standards. So it's possible we'll see something, but I'm not aware of any at this point.
Okay. I think we have time for a couple more questions. One of our participants wants to know, are there any states that you are aware of that are currently taxing electronic cigarettes at increased rates, similar to the push several years ago for combustible tobacco taxes?
I can probably take a first stab at that. There are a few states out there that have started to do this. We do have some publications on our website too that people could look at, which would be helpful. There's a few questions, that surround any sort of taxation. It gets a lot more complicated where e-cigarettes are concerned, because you have questions about whether you tax the liquid in the e-cigarette, and then if you do you tax it just by volume or do you tax it by nicotine concentration? E-cigarettes have various accessories and components, and there's a question about whether the tax should apply to those as well. There's a question about whether, if you do tax, if you don't tax by the liquid, you can just tax by, percentage of price, what's called an ad valorem tax. So this is an area a few states have started wading into, and a few local communities where local communities have taxation authority. So I don't know that there's been a gold standard developed at this point for taxing e-cigarettes. It's still something a lot of communities are experimenting with.
Okay, thank you. And our last question, and I don't know if we have enough time to answer this one, but the question is, what other intervention strategies for public health administrators to use to help the communities that they serve? Any resources you want to direct people to, or some ideas there?
I take just one comment on this, which is that the agenda for what can be done to protect people in local jurisdictions is still very large. And whether it's state-level rules or local city, county, municipal rules, regulating sale of flavors, protecting people in multi-unit housing, changing the age of sale and purchase of tobacco products to 21, which removes legal tobacco from the high school setting and therefore reduces overall initiation rates and decreases the secondhand exposure for many, many pregnant women, and including all tobacco products, including all e-cigarette products and all existing tobacco control rules for clean air. All of that can be done locally and should be done locally to provide a better environment to protect children's health and lungs and to protect other non-smokers. So I would encourage people to reach out to local coalitions and to to find those public health strategies and to try to implement them.
Just the one caveat is you need to make sure you have local authority, because in some states there's preemption of local policies. But those are all great policies, and I totally second what Jonathan said on those policies.
Great. Thank you very much for all of your wisdom and your answers. Unfortunately, we've come to a close of today's webinar. So I want to thank our presenters, John Klein and Mike Freiberg, for their excellent presentations. And thank you all for joining us today. And finally, we do have a quick evaluation of today's session, and I hope you'll take a moment to complete this for us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being on it.
Yep, thanks a lot.